His name isn't important. What matters is what he did every single night before bed. He shook a small pill from an orange bottle. One pill. Same bottle, same ritual for almost 2 years. It helped him sleep. That was the whole point. 3 nights later, his wife found him on the bathroom floor. The left side of his face was drooping. He couldn't speak. He couldn't lift his left arm. Now, I want you to think about something before we go any further. The thing he took every night is not a prescription drug. You can buy it at any pharmacy. It's probably in your medicine cabinet right now. Millions of older adults take it tonight, believing it's completely safe. So here is the question I want you to sit with. What if the thing helping you sleep is quietly setting the stage for a stroke? By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what was happening inside his brain and his blood on those 3 nights. And more than that, you will know what to do differently, starting tonight. Most people think of sleep as the safe part of the day. Heart resting, brain offline, nothing to worry about. Here is the truth. Sleep is not passive. It is one of the most biologically active windows in your entire 24-hour cycle. And for the aging brain, it is also the most dangerous. Let me explain why. Think of your brain like a city that runs 2 separate shifts. During the day, it handles traffic, signals, communication, all the demands of being awake and alert. But at night, the cleaning crew comes in. A system called the glymphatic system, your brain's own waste clearance network, switches on almost exclusively during deep sleep. It flushes out toxic byproducts that built up during the day. Things like amyloid proteins, the same proteins linked to Alzheimer's disease. This cleaning cycle only runs when the lights go out. Disrupt the sleep, and the trash doesn't get taken out. But here is what most people never hear about, even from their own doctors. During healthy sleep, your blood pressure is supposed to drop. Not dramatically, about 10 to 20% below your daytime level. We call this the dipping pattern. It is one of your brain's most important protective windows. That pressure drop gives the walls of your blood vessels a genuine rest. It reduces the mechanical stress on tissue that, after 60 years of use, is already less flexible than it once was. Now here is the problem. In many adults over 60, this dip never happens. Blood pressure doesn't fall during sleep. In some people, it actually rises. This condition is called nocturnal hypertension, and research suggests it may affect somewhere between 1 in 5 and 1 in 3 older adults with high blood pressure. Most of them have never been told. Because the reading your doctor takes during the day tells them almost nothing about what your blood pressure is doing at 3 in the morning. And then, around 4 or 5 in the morning, something else happens. Your body begins preparing to wake up. The adrenal glands release a wave of cortisol. Blood pressure starts climbing. Clotting factors in the blood become more active. The proteins that help seal a wound essentially go on high alert. Blood becomes stickier, more prone to forming a clot. This is the window when most strokes actually happen. Not randomly, not from nowhere. From a biological sequence that has been building quietly for hours while you were asleep. Now, on those 3 nights, the man in this story was walking straight into that window in the worst possible condition. His blood pressure wasn't dipping, it was climbing. And something he had taken an hour before bed was making everything significantly worse. But to understand how, we need to look first at what was happening inside his blood. Because that is where this story really begins. Think of your blood like a garden hose. When it flows freely, when the water pressure is right and the hose is flexible, It reaches every corner without effort. Now imagine that hose starts to narrow. The water inside gets thicker. The pressure has to build just to push things through. And the weakest points in the system, the bends, the older sections of tubing, those are the places that start to give way first. That is what happens inside your blood vessels when blood viscosity rises. And at night, it rises in almost everyone. Here is why. When you sleep, you stop drinking. You breathe. You lose moisture through your skin. Your body is quietly losing fluid for 6, 7, 8 hours with nothing coming in to replace it. So the liquid portion of your blood, what we call plasma, slowly decreases in volume. What's left becomes more concentrated. The red blood cells, the clotting proteins, the inflammatory markers, they're all packed into a smaller space. Your blood gets thicker, stickier, harder to move. In a young, healthy cardiovascular system, this is manageable. The body compensates. But in adults over 60, the system is already working with less reserve. Arteries are stiffer. The inner lining of blood vessels, the endothelium, is less responsive. And so that natural overnight thickening becomes something the body handles less gracefully than it used to. Now add 3 things that make this significantly worse. The first is mild chronic dehydration going into bed. Most older adults don't feel thirsty the way they once did. The thirst mechanism becomes less reliable after 60. So many people are already slightly behind on fluids before they ever close their eyes. The second is late eating. A heavy meal in the evening, especially one with a lot of sodium, raises blood sugar and triggers an inflammatory response overnight. Inflammatory markers in the blood contribute to arterial stress. They make the inner walls of blood vessels more vulnerable to injury, and injured vessel walls are where clots form. The third, and this is the one nobody warns you about, is a specific category of sleep medication that makes all of this dramatically worse. I will get to exactly what that medication is in just a moment, because you need to understand the full picture first. Here is where the danger becomes concrete. Thicker blood, moving more slowly through vessels that are already under pressure, combined with clotting factors that activate in the early morning hours. This is the biological setup for an ischemic stroke. A clot forms somewhere in the circulatory system and travels to the brain, or forms directly inside a vessel supplying the brain. Blood stops reaching the tissue on the other side of that blockage. Cells begin to die within minutes. This is not a rare or catastrophic event in the sense of something dramatic happening. It is quiet. It happens while a person is lying completely still, often deeply asleep, completely unaware that anything is wrong. The body gives no alarm. There is no pain, just a slow, silent process unfolding over hours. When the man from our story arrived at the emergency room, the team noted immediately that his blood was unusually concentrated. When his wife described his evening routine, she mentioned the pill. She said he had been taking it almost every night for 2 years. That detail changed the entire picture. The pill was diphenhydramine. You may not recognize that name, but you almost certainly recognize what it's in. Benadryl, Tylenol PM, Z-Quil, Unisom sleep tabs. Most store-brand products with the word PM on the label. These are among the most purchased over-the-counter products in the country. They are marketed as gentle, natural feeling, a safe way to get a little help falling asleep. And for a single night, for a short period, in a younger adult, that description is mostly fair. But that is not how most older adults use them. In my neurology clinic, I see patients who have been taking these pills every night for months, some for years. They work, so they keep taking them. Nobody told them to stop. Here is what nobody told them about why they should. These drugs belong to a class called first-generation antihistamines. They work by blocking a chemical messenger in the brain called acetylcholine. Think of acetylcholine as the brain's internal communication wire. It carries signals involved in memory, attention, heart rhythm regulation, and the tone of blood vessels. Block it for one night and you feel drowsy. Block it repeatedly, night after night, in a brain over 60 that is already producing less acetylcholine than it once did, and you begin disrupting systems that have no backup. This cumulative effect has a name. We call it anticholinergic burden. And research now consistently links high anticholinergic burden in older adults to accelerated cognitive decline, reduced brain volume, and, critically, disrupted cardiovascular regulation. But there is a more immediate problem, one that connects directly to everything we just discussed about blood thickening. Diphenhydramine is profoundly drying. That is partly how it works. It thickens mucus, dries tissues, reduces fluid throughout the body. Taken once before a flight when you're congested, that effect is manageable. Taken every night before sleep, it compounds the natural overnight dehydration that is already happening. The blood that was already thickening as you lost moisture through breathing, it thickens further. The plasma volume that was already shrinking, it shrinks more. You are essentially adding a drying agent to a system that is already losing fluid for the next 8 hours. And then there is the heart. Anticholinergic drugs interfere with the electrical signals that regulate heart rhythm. In some people, particularly those with undiagnosed atrial fibrillation, which becomes increasingly common after 60, this interference becomes the direct pathway to an embolic stroke. Here is how that works. Atrial fibrillation causes the upper chambers of the heart to quiver instead of pump in a coordinated rhythm. Blood pools. And pooled blood, especially blood that is already thicker than normal, forms clots. Those clots can travel from the heart directly to the brain. We call this an embolic stroke. It tends to be severe. And it tends to happen during the exact window when everything else we've described is already compounding. The early morning hours, when cortisol is rising, clotting factors are activated, and the body is at its most vulnerable. Now, I want to be careful here, because honesty matters more to me than a dramatic conclusion. We cannot say with certainty that this pill alone caused the stroke in our patient's story. That is not how medicine works, and I will not tell you something I cannot stand behind. What we can say, clearly based on the evidence, is that nightly diphenhydramine use in an adult over 60 creates conditions that make a stroke significantly more likely. It thickens the blood. It disrupts heart rhythm. It blunts the protective dipping pattern that the brain depends on overnight. And it does all three things simultaneously, every single night, in the window when the brain is already most exposed. That is not a side effect. That is a mechanism, and it matters. Here is something I want you to understand about cardiovascular risk, because it changes everything about how you think about your evenings. Risk doesn't add, it multiplies. When we hear about a single habit that's bad for the heart, we tend to weigh it in isolation. One glass of wine, one late dinner, one pill. And we think, that's not so serious. One thing on its own probably won't hurt me. And in many cases, that reasoning is correct. One factor rarely pushes a healthy system past its limits. But that is not how nights actually unfold. Nights are not a single variable. They are a sequence of choices that stack on top of each other inside the same biological window. And when several moderate stressors hit that window at the same time, especially in a cardiovascular system that is already carrying some arterial stiffness, some plaque, some reduction in reserve that comes simply from being over 60, the combined effect is not the sum of those risks. It is something far larger. I call this the compound night effect. Let me walk you through what a realistic evening looks like for many adults over 60. Not an extreme evening, a normal one. Dinner at 7:30 or 8. Maybe a slightly heavy meal, some salt, some fat, nothing dramatic. A glass of wine while watching television. Some screen time before bed. A PM pill around 10 because sleep has been difficult lately and it helps. In bed by 10:30. Nothing about that evening feels dangerous. Nothing stands out. It is just a Tuesday. But here is what is happening inside the body by 3 in the morning. The meal elevated blood sugar and triggered overnight inflammation, putting quiet pressure on the arterial walls. The wine, even just one glass, acted as a diuretic, pulling fluid from the blood and making it more concentrated. The screen time suppressed melatonin production, blunting the natural blood pressure dip that the brain depends on during those first hours of sleep. And the diphenhydramine added its own drying effect on top of the dehydration the alcohol had already started, while simultaneously interfering with the electrical rhythm of the heart. Now blood is thicker than it should be. The dipping pattern never came. Blood pressure has been elevated or flat all night instead of falling. The heart's rhythm may be slightly disrupted, and in the early morning hours, the cortisol surge begins. Blood pressure climbing, clotting factors activating, the system pushing toward its daily peak. Each of those factors, standing alone, might be something the body navigates. A stiff but functional system can absorb one insult reasonably well. But stacked together, converging in sequence through the same vulnerable hours, in a body that is already working with less margin than it had at 40, the system can cross a threshold. That is exactly what those 3 nights look like for the man in this story. Not unusual nights, not reckless ones, just his normal routine, playing out the way it always did. Except on the 3rd night, something crossed a line. A clot formed. It traveled. His brain lost blood supply to a region that controlled movement and speech. He is still in recovery. Progress has been real but slow. And the thing that stays with me, the thing he said to me when he was finally able to speak clearly again, is that he had no idea the pill was doing anything except helping him sleep. That is the nature of the compound night effect. It doesn't announce itself. There is no warning night, no near miss that signals something is building. The risk compounds silently, habit by habit, evening by evening, until the system runs out of room to compensate. Now here is what I want you to hold on to as we move into what you can actually do. Your brain is remarkably resilient. Most of these conditions are not permanent. They are not written into your biology as fixed outcomes. They are the result of specific, modifiable patterns happening in a specific window of time. And that means they can be changed. Let's start with the pill itself. If you are using diphenhydramine regularly for sleep, any product with PM on the label, any product containing Benadryl, please do not stop abruptly without talking to your doctor first. That conversation needs to happen soon, but it needs to happen with your physician. What I want you to understand is that the problem is not a single dose. The problem is the nightly habit, repeated over months and years, in a brain and body that process these drugs more slowly than they once did.
When you have that conversation, ask about alternatives.
Low-dose melatonin used short-term is a reasonable bridge for some people, though recent research suggests even that carries complexity when used chronically. The approach with the strongest evidence, and no chemical side effects at all, is cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, which we call CBTI. It addresses the root patterns that are keeping you awake, rather than masking them each night with a medication. For many people, it works better than any pill over the long run. If there is an underlying cause driving your sleep problems, sleep apnea, chronic pain, anxiety, that is where the attention needs to go. Treating the cause gives your brain what it actually needs. A pill that dries your blood and disrupts your heart rhythm does not. Now, 2 things you can do tonight without a doctor's visit.
The first is hydration.
Drink a small glass of water about 60 to 90 minutes before bed. Not right at bedtime, where it may wake you. Early enough that your body can absorb it and carry it into the night. This simple step reduces the blood concentration that builds overnight. It is not dramatic. It is quiet biology working in your favor instead of against you. The second is the compound night check. Before you go to bed, take a quick mental inventory. Heavy meal in the last 3 hours. Alcohol in the last 3 hours. A PM pill? Screen time in the last hour. Each one alone is manageable. All 4 together is the compound night effect in motion. You do not need to be perfect. You need to be aware of when things are stacking.
And one more thing.
If you have never had your nighttime blood pressure measured, ask your doctor about ambulatory monitoring. The reading taken in the office tells your doctor almost nothing about what your brain is experiencing at 3 in the morning. That information matters. You have a right to it. What you have done tonight, understanding what was happening inside that man's blood, learning what the compound night effect actually is, that is not a small thing. Most people will never have this conversation with themselves. You just did. But here is what I need you to understand before you close this video. What you just learned protects blood flow to the brain. But blood flow is only part of the picture, because in my neurology clinic, I have sat across from patients who were doing everything right. Sleeping better, managing blood pressure, reducing inflammation, and still came to me with something they had been explaining away for months. A little more forgetfulness than usual. Trouble finding words they have always known. Small things that felt like aging, but were not. They had protected their circulation, but a separate, slower process had already been running quietly in the background. And by the time they recognized the signals, they wished they had known what to look for much earlier. The video on your screen right now is about exactly that. The early signs most people dismiss, and why the window to act on them is not later. It is the natural next step from everything we covered today. What you just fixed creates the conditions for a healthier brain. What comes next is how you protect what is inside it. Do not close this out. Watch it now while the momentum is still here.